As Dan mentioned this morning, he is going to be leaving us. Next Sunday will be his last Sunday here. And I want to invite all of you to a little reception between the morning services. We'll be meeting in the Family Life Center, as many of you already do. But we'll have a time there just to recognize and express our appreciation to Dan. And so we want you to plan to be here next Sunday and participate in that with us. We come finally today to the end of our study of the book of Revelation. For a few of you, you are rejoicing at that fact. Others of you perhaps are not as excited to wrap it up and to leave it. John the Apostle has been on the island of Patmos, which you see in the lower center part of the screen. His home base is the city of Ephesus. And according to the church tradition and what we know from God's word, John sort of spent much of his time in that city of Ephesus. He, in his captivity, is experiencing this time on the island of Patmos. And in his place is Timothy, most likely. There is a Gospel of Timothy, an apocryphal writing, that indicates that Timothy died at about 97 AD. And so Timothy would be the individual who was responsible for the churches at Ephesus. And what I'd like you to do this morning is to put yourself in Timothy's place. When we left him last Sunday night, we were thinking together about Timothy and his mother and grandmother. He was 65 years of age. He was in charge of the churches at Ephesus. Now he was 35 years of age. Now he's about 65 years of age, some 30 years later, here in the city of Ephesus. John is probably about 80, and John is the last surviving member, as far as we know, of the preceding generation. So the Apostle Paul has died as a martyr. Peter has died as a martyr at about 67 AD. Apollos is gone. Priscilla and Aquila are gone. Silas most likely is also gone. We have all of those who have been the apostles of the Lord Jesus, who have died lives, most of them as martyrs. And so we have Timothy, who is left at this point. He is the senior statesman in charge. John has been his mentor, most likely, and the one to whom he would look. We remember Timothy as being an individual who is by nature sort of shy and timid, thrust into leadership by the Apostle Paul and asked to assume the role of a bishop or overseer in the churches that are all a part of the Ephesian complex. He is struggling, in my opinion, with the fact that he is charged with the responsibility for all of these churches and living under the persecution of a Roman emperor by the name of Diocletian. Diocletian dies at 97. This book, best we can tell, the book of Revelation and the information that comes to John comes at about 95. So we're right near the end of that first century. John is on the island of Patmos because of Diocletian, and because of his testimony, he is suffering this period of confinement. Put yourself in Timothy's place. You're left alone. All of those that you looked up to are gone. Parents are gone. Perhaps teachers and pastors that you have appreciated over the years are gone. You are in the latter years of your life. And the one who has been a mentor and teacher for you is imprisoned on an island off the coast there. How would you be feeling? What might be going through your mind? What kind of struggle would you be dealing with? we're told that John was boiled in oil, but that did not take his life. And so then he was incarcerated on this island off the coast there in the Aegean Sea. As you think about your life today, what kinds of struggles are you facing? How are they like what Timothy might have felt? In what ways maybe are you feeling abandoned? In what ways are you feeling the struggle to continue with your experience? This letter comes at this point in time from John the Apostle to Timothy. And what strikes me is the fact that it says to us several times, we read the words just now in the first part of the book, that this information was given by God to give to Jesus, who sent it by his angel to John for his bondservants. All right? So as we begin to put this whole book together and ask ourselves the question, what's the point? What's the thrust? What is it that this book says? I think we need to approach it from the eyes of someone like Timothy, as if we can identify with him and we can understand that this revelation is information that has been given for his bondservants. Now, the term bondservant means, it's the word doulos, it means slave. What it means in the way in which it's used here and the rest of the New Testament, Paul calls himself a bondservant of Christ. It means a disciple, but it's more than a disciple. It's one who is committed in his or her discipleship so that that individual sees himself or herself as a slave of Christ, as someone who has no will of his own. And so here we are, living perhaps, if you project back there to Ephesus, or living today in 2017, and you see yourself as a disciple of Jesus, who is a follower of Jesus, who is someone who is committed to serving Jesus first and foremost, then this letter is for you. This revelation is written for us. We read at the outset, as Josh read a moment ago, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him, Jesus, to show to his disciples, his committed followers, the things which must soon take place, and he sent and communicated by his angels to his bondservant John for the rest of us bondservants. So for those of us who are committed disciples, this book is written. And I think there are three things that stand out for us as we look at the book, and they represent the three major sections of the book. The first is that Jesus nurtures his church, that he nurtures the church. He is pictured in these first chapters as standing among the lampstands. At the end of that first chapter, John says that he turned to see the one who was speaking to him, and when I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. He placed his right hand on me, said, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, the living one. I was dead. Behold, I'm alive forevermore." And he goes on to say, "As for the mystery of the 7 stars, which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 churches, the stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the lampstands are the 7 churches." And so Jesus is standing in the middle of them. It's pictured this way, as he is standing in the midst of these lamps. And the lampstand is something which serves as a base for light. And so he's saying that the church at Ephesus is one of them, in this passage that we're looking at right here, as well as the others. And the church in Hamilton is a light on a lampstand. And so what Jesus is saying to John is, I'm the one who walks among the lampstands. See it there? It says, to the angel of the church at Ephesus, the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, the one who walks among the 7 golden lampstands, I know your deeds and your toil and your perseverance and so on. And so the message is, first of all, that Jesus is the one who nurtures the church. That means that Jesus is the one who nurtures you and me. We are the church. It's not the building. The building is convenient. The building is beautiful. We appreciate the building. Sometimes I wish it were a little bigger. Sometimes I wish we had some other things. Some of you, if you put that money in the offering plate, will take care of that. But the church is not the building. The church is you and me. And so the lampstand symbolizes the locale, the organization, the place where the light is being emitted. And so Jesus walks among us as one who is tending the lampstands. That means he's looking after us. That means for Timothy's sake, he's saying to Timothy again, okay, Timothy, I'm here. As a matter of fact, Timothy, I have this against you that you have left your first love. And we got into that as we worked on it together. So he's present, he's aware of the circumstances, and he also is sort of challenging. He is confronting us for the areas where we're not living or ministering as we ought. And so the first message that comes through in this letter that Jesus has written to those of us who are his servants is that he is in the midst of us. And then he talks about the future. So in the first 5 chapters, we have the church first here on the earth, and then in 4 and 5, we have the church in heaven. John says, after these things, that is after the letters to the 7 churches, I looked and behold a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice that I heard, like the sound of a trumpet, said, come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things. And so we have now the picture of 24 elders who are seated on 24 thrones around the throne of God. And they are pictured as worshiping God in that situation. One artist has depicted it this way. We've used this picture before, and we read these words. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and on the thrones I saw 24 elders clothed in white garments, golden crowns on their heads. And what we discover as you trace the use of that phrase, 24 elders, through the book of Revelation, is that we're talking about church saints. We're talking about the church not as it's here on the earth, but the church as it is in heaven, following what is called the rapture of the church. And so, as Jesus sends this message through his angel to John for the rest of us, what he's saying is, I want you to know that I am walking in your midst, that I am present. I'm with you in the struggles that you are facing. As you wrestle with the issues of your life, as you deal with the things that cause you stress and heartache, I'm there with you. And I'm also there to prod you to fulfill the calling, to be that committed disciple that you have said that you want to be. And I am coming in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And there will be the time when you will be caught up from this earth. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, we will be changed as the rapture takes place. And so we'll be caught up into the presence of the Lord. So message number 1 is that Jesus is nurturing you and me. He knows where we are. He knows what we're going through. He's there to meet that need and also to exhort and to challenge us in the process. We are being prepared by Jesus for the marriage of the Lamb that takes place. It's mentioned to us in the latter part of the book. And so we're going to be taken from this earth. And so he's saying to Timothy, persevere. In each of those 7 letters, he says, to the one who overcomes, I will do such and such. And so he's encouraging you and me to overcome, to face those challenges, to live as a faithful disciple, committed disciple of Jesus, and to overcome because he's going to appear suddenly. All right, the second component of the book is the middle section of the book. And here we find that Jesus judges the nations for his own glory. This middle section is divided into, in my judgment, into three parts. The first half, in chapters 6 through 9, depicts for us the first half of Daniel's 70th week. Now, we went back and we looked at the Old Testament prophecy. Daniel had been told that there would be 70 weeks that were dedicated for the finishing of God's program for the nation of Israel. That's a whole study in itself, and we can't spend all the time there this morning. But the last of those weeks, the 70th week, a 7-year period, is the time in which Jesus is going to finish his program with the nation of Israel. And the first half of that is dealt with in chapters 6 through 9. We read in chapter 6, verse 1, I saw when the Lamb, one of the 7 seals, and broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a loud voice of thunder, come. And I looked, and behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. And so we have Jesus breaking the 7 seals on the scroll or the book that is given to us. John, as he sat with the elders, as he viewed things with those elders in chapter 5, saw this book. And you'll remember that he began to weep because there was no one to open the book. And now Jesus steps up and begins to open the book. And that's phase 1 of the judgment which is going to come on the earth. It's revealed by Jesus through the angel to John that when we get to the 4th seal, we have the 4 riders, the 4 horsemen. When we get through the 4th seal, 25% of the earth's population has been destroyed. So this is the time of great judgment which Jesus is bringing on the earth. Then we have, following that, the sealing of 144,000 Jewish witnesses. These are individuals, 12,000 from each tribe of Israel, who are supernaturally sealed by Jesus to be witnesses to him. And so on the one hand, we have the judgment of the nations that's beginning to take place, and on the other hand, we have Jesus sealing these 144,000 Jewish witnesses who start the process of bringing the nation of Israel back to Jesus in faith, so that there will be the people to populate his kingdom when we get to the end of this period. That's followed by the second phase of part 1, which is the trumpet judgments. John tells us that he saw 7 angels with 7 trumpets, and each trumpet is associated with a judgment that takes place on the earth. And so we have this first phase of judgment that takes place. Then there's a sort of a breather at the middle in chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13. And at this point, we have the angel who stands with the open book and acknowledges that this judgment has been brought upon the earth. And we have John who is told to measure the temple. And we have these 5 3.5-year statements that take place at this point. So the first one is that the temple is to be measured because it's going to be trampled underfoot for 3.5 years. Here's a list of those things that take place. And at this point, we're right here in the middle of this. Here we have chapter 11, 12, 12, and chapter 13, verse 5. And these 3 things all are for 3.5-year period of time. So John has been walked through this period by the angel by the revelation that Jesus is given to understand the nature of the judgment which is coming on the earth. And then the third section of this middle area is the entire earth, is the judgment which is coming, and the entire earth is warned about this judgment beforehand. And so in chapter 14, we have the angels, remember, who fly through the mid-heavens, and they proclaim to the earth not to become part of what the Antichrist is doing. And that leads us then to the third section, which is the second half of the 70th week. And here we have the 7 bowl judgments, which we have studied. Angels that come out of the temple in heaven who are giving these bowls of judgment. And each bowl brings a severe judgment on the earth. And so they are told by Jesus to pour out these bowls. And so we have the darkness that comes, and we have the various trials that come upon the face of the earth. And then we have Babylon judged in chapters 17 and 18. And so in this segment of the book, we have Jesus who sends this message for you and me. And the message is that the earth is going to be judged in accordance with God's pre-designed, pre-authorized plan. And that nothing is going to prevent that from happening. Here is the judgment which I am bringing on the earth. It covers a 7-year period of time, and there are these sequences of events that take place, and I have it all laid out, and it's all signed, sealed, and delivered. So how does that relate to you and me? I think what it says to us is this. We live in a world like Timothy did, with an emperor who was persecuting the Christians. And they were probably praying for Diocletian to be set aside. And in 97 AD, the same year that we understand Timothy to have died, Diocletian died. And an emperor by the name of Trajan came on the scene who was worse. And so we have persecution that gets even worse for the church. But the message from Jesus is, I'm above all of that. I'm in charge of all of that. And all of the stuff that's happening on the earth will be judged. All of these nations and all of these kings, which sometimes seem to be so powerful and so overwhelming, circumstances in our lives, so overwhelming, I'm above all of that. I'm in charge of all of that. And I will bring the proper judgment on the earth at the proper time. And so, as it says in the book of Zechariah, it will come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And so Jesus is about the process of setting up his kingdom, and all of the nations that oppose that will be judged. And so the day of reckoning is coming. We look at what's happening in the world around us, and there are things that are unfair. There are ways that we are perhaps mistreated, that peoples in various parts of the world are mistreated, Christians persecuted, far worse than we have it. And Jesus says the day is coming that I'm going to deal with all of those things. And so that's the second lesson in the book. The first one is that Jesus is nurturing his church. So he's there. He knows where you are. He knows what you're going through. He's there to nurture you and to challenge you. The second one is he's going to judge the nations of the earth. And so the things that happen in the world around us are all going to be dealt with in his time. Some things sooner, other things when he comes. And the third part of the book is the last section in which Jesus secures his kingdom for his own glory. And so we have his return that takes place in chapter 19. John says, I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it was called Faithful and True. In righteousness he judges and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire. On his head are many diadems. And so Jesus is coming to this earth to set up his kingdom. It's pictured for us in that passage in which we have the image of one who's riding on this white horse. He has a sword that goes out of his mouth, and with that sword, he smites the nations in order to establish his kingdom. So not only will Jesus judge the Gentile nations of the earth, but he's going to establish his own kingdom here on the earth, and we'll all be a part of that millennial kingdom. It says in chapter 20 that all of those who have lost their lives during this tribulation period will be resurrected. John says, I saw thrones, and they sat on them. Judgment was given to them, and the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, had not received the mark of the beast on their forehead or their hand, they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. We, as the bride of Christ, will return with him to reign with him as well. And so the kingdom of Jesus will be established here on the earth. And that kingdom will last for 1,000 years here on this earth. We looked at the fact that it's a near Edenic, it's like the Garden of Eden. It's returned to a whole new set of circumstances here on this planet as we experience the glory of the Lord. The Old Testament says the glory of the Lord is going to fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And so we're going to see that day. We're going to participate in that day. We're going to rule with him in his kingdom here on the earth. Then Jesus will judge one final time all of those who are unbelievers at the great white throne judgment, spelled out for us at the end of chapter 20 in Revelation. And then we proceed to deal with the eternal state in heaven. And so we saw these last few weeks John's description given by Jesus of the place where we will live forever. So the kingdom of Jesus is going to be transferred from this earth right into glory. And so when the present earth and the present heavens are destroyed, new heavens and a new earth are created. The new Jerusalem is going to come down out of heaven, out of the presence of God, to the new earth. And we're going to live in that new Jerusalem with Jesus forever. So the message that Jesus is sending to his bondservants basically is, I'm in control. I'm the one who has ordered all of these things. And so as you face the issues, as you face the difficulties, decisions that you're making, problems that you deal with, disappointments that come along the way, this hope is before us that one of these days we're going to be in Jesus' presence, and it's as sure as tomorrow is. And so here's the structure. Here's what the book looks like. And perhaps you have been working from this outline as we've walked through it. In the first 5 chapters, we have Jesus as he nurtures his church, first on the earth and then in heaven. In the middle section, which is the largest section of the book, we have Jesus' judgment on the Gentile nations. And so from the time of Daniel in the Old Testament, about 600 BC, all the way down until Jesus actually comes and sets up his own kingdom on the earth, these nations are going to be judged. The times of the Gentiles will be judged. And that's the thrust, that's the major part of the book. And so he wants us to understand that the various kingdoms of the earth will be judged. The various things that we see happening, the things that we decry, the things that we are sometimes upset about as we watch the news, as we see things that are going on in our world, those things are all going to be dealt with in Jesus' way, in his time. And then finally, the kingdom will be established here on the earth and ultimately transferred into heaven itself. So, as I see it, the thrust of the book is that those of us who are faithful disciples will live in the light of Jesus' plan for the future. He wants you to understand, he wants me to understand that whatever it is that I'm going through right now, whatever major struggle, whatever issue is sort of overwhelming me, that Jesus has a plan that's beyond that. He's here with us. He walks with us through this time and in this process. He will bring perfect judgment. He will deal with all of the evil, all of those things in the world around us. And he ultimately will bring the kingdom that he has promised. So 3 things, I think, follow on that. Number 1, we should anticipate his return. In the struggles that you're having, think in terms of the fact that Jesus may show up today. That he may call us as a church out of this planet right now. That should encourage us and help us as we face the issues. We are not overwhelmed by those issues. We are faithful servants in the midst of those issues. Secondly, acknowledge that Jesus is going to judge. He'll take care of it. We can get upset, we can get stressed out, or we can say, okay, Jesus is going to deal with it. He'll handle it. And then thirdly, we await the rewards. We ought to be thinking in terms of, what is Jesus going to provide for me as he takes me to be with him forever? How do I earn those rewards that he has for me? Revelation is a book that you ought to read. It's a book that you ought to have a basic understanding of, and that you ought to seek to assimilate, because it's designed to encourage you in the midst of the struggles and issues of life. Father, help us.